Nobody talks about sport touring bikes, and that is exactly the problem. They are not sport bikes, so the magazines ignore them. They are not full dressers, so the forums argue about something else entirely. But if you actually rack up miles, this is the category that gets it right. Real wind protection. A spine that still works at 50, hard luggage, enough power to overtake without a prayer, and a bike you can still pick up off the side stand. Here are 12 that prove it. Cruising comfortably. In at number 12, the Honda ST1300. This is where you need to start, because the ST1300 is the bike your mechanic secretly wants. Prices on clean examples sit between $3,000 and $6,000, and the seat height is a low, friendly 31 inches, which means shorter riders can actually flat-foot this thing at a light. What it does that a sport bike cannot is simple. It disappears underneath you on a 6-hour ride. The V4 engine is smooth, the fairing genuinely blocks weather, and the saddlebags are integrated, not bolted on as an afterthought, with roughly 1.24 cubic feet of combined capacity, enough for a week away without strapping anything to the pillion seat. Honda originally built this bike as a police platform first and a civilian tourer second, which explains why the frame and suspension were engineered to handle far more abuse than the average rider will ever throw at it. Retired police units, once you sort through the paint and the mounting holes, are some of the best mechanical bargains in the entire used market. Fuel range on a full tank comfortably clears 200 miles, which matters more than horsepower numbers when you are the one planning gas stops. Before you buy one, check the fuel pump and the final drive seal for weeping oil. Both are known weak points on high mileage examples, and both are expensive enough to change your mind about the price. Get past that inspection and you own one of the most underrated touring platforms Honda ever built, and one that Honda supported with genuine parts and dealer service for a full decade after production ended, which is rare treatment for a bike this old and this affordable. If you are enjoying this rundown so far, hit subscribe now, because the rest of this channel is built on exactly this kind of underrated, overlooked bike you will not find ranked anywhere else. But if the ST feels a touch too soft for your taste, the next bike on this list swings hard in the opposite direction. Idling quietly at number 11, the Kawasaki Concours. 14, 2008 through 2017. This is the bike people forget has a superbike engine hiding under a full touring shell. The detuned 1,352 cubic centimeters in line, 4 from the ZX-14, means effortless passing power. The kind that makes a loaded highway merge feel almost lazy. And it does this while still returning respectable fuel economy in the low 40s for a bike this size and weight. Prices range from $5,000 to $9,000, depending on mileage and whether it has the optional electric windshield. Seat height sits around 32 inches, tall enough that shorter riders should sit on one before committing. What it does better than almost anything else here is raw thrust, while still carrying 2 people and a week of luggage without complaint. Kawasaki even gave it standard traction control back when that was still a rarity outside of superbikes, a genuinely forward-thinking touch for a 2008 release. Later years added an electrically adjustable windshield you could tune from the handlebar without tools, a feature that competing manufacturers were still charging thousands extra for well into the following decade. The saddlebags are cavernous by class standards, and the frame-mounted fairing keeps highway buffeting to a minimum, even at speeds well past what most riders will admit to on camera. The buying check is the shaft drive. Listen for clunking on acceleration and deceleration, because a worn U-joint is a real repair, not a 5-minute fix. Insurance and depreciation on this one have both flattened out completely at this point in its life, meaning the money you spend today is roughly the money you will get back whenever you decide to sell, a rare thing in motorcycling. It is heavy, it is quick, and it genuinely does not care how much you pack. Speaking of packing for the long haul, the next entry basically wrote the rulebook for it. Rolling steadily into number 10, the Yamaha FJR1300, 2001 through 2020, multiple generations. The FJR is the bike other manufacturers get compared against, whether they like it or not. Early first-generation fuel-injected models from the early 2000s can be found for around $3,500, while a late model FJR with electronic suspension and cruise control runs closer to $11,000 used. Seat height ranges from 30.7 to 31.7 inches, depending on the adjustable position, which is a small but genuinely useful feature this category rarely bothers with, and one that later Japanese and European rivals only started copying years after Yamaha made it standard. What separates the FJR from a sport bike is the shaft drive and the wide planted stance at highway speed. What separates it from a full dresser is that it still turns like it means it, with a wheelbase and steering geometry closer to a sport machine than anything wearing hard luggage has any business having. Yamaha kept this platform in production for nearly 2 decades with only incremental updates, which tells you almost everything about how right they got it the first time. Parts availability, aftermarket support, and mechanic familiarity are all still excellent, unlike some of the shorter-lived entries on this list. Before buying, check for regulator rectifier issues on pre-2006 models, a well-documented electrical gremlin that can leave you stranded. The aftermarket support alone sets it apart from everything else on this list, with heated grips, taller screens, lowering links, and full luggage systems all still in active production despite the platform's age, because so many were sold and so many are still on the road, racking up 6-figure odometers. Buy a good one and you have a bike people keep for 15 years and never quite sell. Up next is a bike built for people who want that same competence but without the used bike gamble. Revving confidently at number 9, the Suzuki GSX-S1000GT, 2022 through 2026. This is where the list turns modern, and the GSX-S1000GT is Suzuki finally admitting that not everyone wants a naked bike with no wind protection. New pricing for the base model lands around $13,000 with the loaded GT Plus trim, which adds factory side cases holding 1.31 cubic feet combined, starting near $14,400, and used examples from the first model year are already trading around $10,000 to $11,000. Seat height is a manageable 31.9 inches. What it does that older sport tourers cannot is deliver a genuinely sporty, revvy inline 4 with modern electronics, a quick shifter, and real weather protection, all while keeping the weight lower than most of its rivals, since the engine itself is a lightly detuned version of the GSX-R 1000 Superbike motor rather than a purpose-built touring unit. That heritage shows up the moment you crack the throttle open past 7,000 RPM, somewhere most touring riders never bother to look. It also undercuts the Kawasaki and Yamaha rivals further down this list on price while matching or beating them on outright performance figures, a combination that has made it one of the fastest-selling sport tours Suzuki has released in years. The buying check here is simple since these are still young. Confirm the recall history has been addressed and that the bike has had its first scheduled valve check if it is past the interval. Warranty coverage on a used example bought within the first few years of ownership can often still transfer, something worth asking the seller about directly before you negotiate on price, since it changes the real cost of ownership considerably. Now, speaking of electronics done right, the next bike takes that a step further, with a boxer engine nobody expects to love this much. Leaning smoothly into number 8, the BMW R1250 RS, 2019 through 2023. The R1250 RS is proof that a boxer twin, of all things, can be a phenomenal sport touring engine. And it is worth noting this one is used only now, since BMW replaced it with the R1300 RS. Used pricing runs from roughly $9,000 for early examples up to $14,000 for a low-mileage final year bike. Seat height is adjustable between 31.1 and 32.3 inches, depending on the seat fitted, which helps shorter riders a great deal. What it does that a conventional inline 4 sport tour cannot is deliver massive low-end torque thanks to shift cam variable valve timing, so you are rarely hunting for a gear on a mountain road, and the flat twin layout drops the center of gravity low enough that the bike feels far lighter, tipping into a corner than its published curb weight would suggest. BMW also buried this platform under the shadow of the R1250 GS, which sold in far greater numbers, meaning the RS gets overlooked at trade-in time and priced accordingly. A genuine advantage for a buyer who does not care about badge recognition at the coffee shop. Before buying, check the final drive for oil seepage and confirm the valve clearance service done at 6,000-mile intervals is current, since boxer maintenance schedules catch new owners off guard. Fuel economy on this engine, thanks to that variable valve timing, routinely lands in the high 40s, which is remarkable for a bike putting out well over 100 horsepower. It handles like something far smaller than its curb weight suggests. However, if German engineering is not your thing, the next entry goes full British instead, and it is nowhere near as talked about as it should be. Coasting quietly into number 7, the Triumph Trophy, SE 2013 through 2017. The Trophy SE is the bike Triumph built to go after the FJR and the Concours directly, and then quietly discontinued before enough people noticed how good it was. Used prices sit between $7,000 and $11,000, and seat height is 32.3 inches, on the taller side for this list. What it does uniquely well is blend a genuinely characterful triple engine with electronic suspension and a self-canceling turn signal system. Borrowed from cars, features nothing else in this price range. Offered at the time, the tire pressure monitoring system and electronic WP suspension were similarly ahead of their era, and the panniers were shaped specifically to swallow a full-face helmet without wrestling it in sideways. A small detail most rivals still get wrong. The triple engine note alone is worth the price of admission, somewhere between the growl of a twin and the scream of a 4, and it gives the Trophy a personality the more clinical Japanese options on this list simply do not have. Before buying, check the electronic suspension unit for fault codes, since replacement parts are getting scarcer as Triumph's dealer network deprioritizes an 8-year-old touring model. This scarcity is exactly why it sits at the bottom of the used market despite the spec sheet, reading like something twice the price, and why patient shoppers willing to travel a few hundred miles for the right example tend to walk away with the best deal on this entire list. It is a forgotten gem, and forgotten gems mean you get more bike for less money than the badge would suggest. Now, from a forgotten triple, we move to a V4 that racers actually respect, carving sharply into number 6, the Honda VFR 800 Interceptor 2014 through 2017. The VFR 800 sits closer to the sports side of sport touring than anything else on this list, and that is precisely its appeal. Prices range from $7,000 to $10,500, and the seat height of 32.1 inches pairs with a genuinely sporty riding position that still lets you cover distance without wrist pain. What it does that a full tourer never will is corner like it means it, thanks to the V4 engine's low center of gravity and that famous VTEC power delivery switching in around 7,000 RPM, a mechanical trick that essentially gives you 2 different engines depending on how hard you twist the throttle. The lineage here traces straight back to Honda's endurance racing V4s from the 80s and 90s, and you can genuinely feel that racing DNA in how the chassis communicates through a fast sweeper, something none of the shaft drive tourers on this list can replicate no matter how good their suspension tuning gets. Before buying, listen for a rattling cam chain tensioner at cold start, a known VFR quirk that is cheap to fix but easy to ignore until it is not. Honda also equipped later years with self-canceling turn signals and combined ABS braking, quietly premium touches that most riders never notice until they try to go back to a bike without them. This is the bike for someone who tours but refuses to give up canyon carving on the way there. Next up is a bike that takes that same idea and adds a full class of displacement. Accelerating hard into number 5, the Kawasaki Ninja 1000SX 2020 through 2024. The Ninja 1000SX is what happens when Kawasaki takes a sport bike chassis and just adds a luggage and a taller windscreen. And somehow the formula works perfectly before Kawasaki eventually moved the nameplate over to the larger Ninja 1100SX. Used pricing on this generation runs from $9,000 to $13,000, depending on mileage, and seat height sits at 32.3 inches. What it does better than a dedicated tourer is acceleration. The 1,043 cubic centimeters inline 4-pulls hard, right to red line, something heavier shaft drive tourers simply cannot match. Pound for pound, and Kawasaki wraps that engine in genuinely useful 1.0 6 cubic foot quick release panniers that unlatch in seconds without needing a separate key. A small convenience that makes daily commuting with the bags mounted actually practical rather than a chore. Fuel range sits a touch shorter than the shaft drive bikes on this list, so plan your stops a little more carefully on a genuinely long haul. But the trade-off is a chassis that feels noticeably more alive underneath you. Ride modes, cornering ABS, and a bidirectional quick shifter all came standard on later years, putting genuinely premium electronics on a bike that still undercuts most European rivals by several $1,000s. The buying check is the chain and sprockets, since this is a chain drive bike unlike most of the others here, and neglect shows up fast on a bike this powerful. Service intervals are also notably longer than on a dedicated sport bike, since Kawasaki tuned the valve train specifically with high mileage touring use in mind rather than track day abuse, which is the kind of engineering decision that only shows up years later on an odometer long after the showroom brochures are forgotten. It is genuinely two motorcycles in one, a sport bike on a Tuesday and a tourer on a Friday. Speaking of doing two jobs at once, the next bike does it with an even more flexible triple engine. Gripping firmly at number 4, the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT 2021 through 2026. The Tracer 9 GT proves you do not need 4 cylinders to be a serious sport tourer. New pricing on the base. Tracer 9 starts around $12,600, while the fully equipped GT trim with its electronic suspension and larger screen lands closer to $16,700, and used examples from the first GT model year are available near $11,000. The adjustable seat height ranges from 33.3 to 33.9 inches, tall enough that shorter riders should sit on one first. What it does that most rivals cannot is combine a genuinely light claim curb weight with electronic suspension, meaning it feels far more agile at a stop and in traffic than its touring specification would suggest. And the cross-plane crankshaft in that 890 cubic centimeter triple gives it a firing order and exhaust note that sounds nothing like a conventional inline engine, more of a rumbling growl than a buzz. Yamaha also fitted color-matched hard side cases as standard equipment rather than a pricey option, each one large enough to swallow a full-face helmet, and the newer models added radar-assisted cruise control, a feature you would have paid luxury car money for a decade ago, and now get on a bike costing a fraction of that. Before buying, check that the quick shifter and up-down system are functioning cleanly, since early units occasionally needed a firmware update Yamaha issued through dealers. Resale value on this platform has held up better than almost any other bike in this price range, largely because demand consistently outstrips the supply of clean used examples coming onto the market. If this list has been useful to you, tap that like button now, because it genuinely tells the platform to show this kind of comparison to more riders who are stuck choosing between a sport bike and a full dresser and do not know this category exists. From a bike that is deceptively light, we go straight to one that is unapologetically not. Cruising heavily into number 3, the BMW K1600GT 2011 through 2026. Here is the honest paragraph this list owes you. Sport touring bikes are heavier than photos make them look, and the K1600GT is the biggest example of that on this entire list. It is not a bike for a 5-foot 2-inch rider planning to walk it out of a tight parking spot. New pricing starts around $26,700, with used examples from the early 2010s dropping to $14,000, and seat height sits at 31.9 inches, deceptively low for a bike that weighs over 700 pounds, fueled and ready. What it does that nothing else here can match is deliver a silky inline 6 engine with power that never runs out and a stereo system that actually sounds good at highway speed, along with adaptive headlights that lean into corners with the bike. a genuinely useful safety feature on unlit back roads at night that almost nothing else in this category offers. Over 2.3 cubic feet of integrated side case capacity, pushing well past 3.53 cubic feet with the factory top case fitted, means this is one of the few bikes on this list where packing for a genuine multi-week trip does not require strapping a duffel bag to the pillion seat. The buying check is the reverse gear motor, an electric assist feature unique to this bike, since replacement is costly if it fails. Servicing costs here run noticeably higher than everything else on this list, both in parts and in shop labor rates. So budget accordingly, rather than being surprised at the first scheduled visit. If you can manage the weight at a stop, nothing else on two wheels rides quite like it. If that much bike sounds excessive, the next entry brings things back down to earth without losing the plot. Sneaking cleverly into number 2, Yamaha FJ09, later renamed Tracer 900, 2015 through 2020. This is the budget-minded cousin to the Tracer 9GT, and it deserves far more attention than it gets. Used prices range from $6,000 to $9,000, and seat height sits at a manageable 33.1 inches, though the adjustable design lets you drop it slightly for shorter inseams. What it does that pricier options cannot is deliver most of the sport touring experience at half the cost, thanks to a torquey 847 cubic centimeters triple engine borrowed from the MT-09 and later GT trim years added Yamaha's adjustable electronic suspension, a feature that typically costs thousands more on rival machines. This generation also introduced quick-release hardside cases as a factory accessory that mounts cleanly without leaving unsightly bracket holes when removed, something owners of other bikes on this list often complain about after swapping luggage on and off for years. Before buying, check the throttle mapping in the aggressive setting for snatchy response, a known early complaint that Yamaha addressed with later firmware, so confirm the update has been applied. Because it shares so many components with the naked MT-09, parts availability and independent mechanic familiarity are both excellent, keeping long-term ownership costs refreshingly low for a bike with this much genuine capability. It is proof that you do not need 5 figures to get real wind protection and real luggage capacity, which brings us to the final bike on this list, one built by a company that arguably invented this entire idea of a sporty tourer. Blasting confidently into number 1, the BMW S1000XR 2015 through 2026. The S1000XR closes this list because it argues, fairly convincingly, that a superbike engine belongs in a sport touring chassis all along. New pricing for the current model runs from roughly $18,000 to $18,800. Used examples from the first generation available closer to $11,000, and seat height sits around 33.5 inches, tall enough with a 3-position adjustable seat that shorter riders should absolutely sit on one first. What it does that nothing else on this list matches is outright speed. Borrowing the S1000RR's engine, detuned only slightly, means this is the fastest bike here in a straight line by a wide margin, while still carrying luggage and a passenger comfortably. And the semi-active suspension automatically adjusts damping based on load and riding mode faster than a human could ever dial it in manually. It is also the bike on this list most likely to embarrass a dedicated sport bike rider at a stoplight, then turn around and swallow 400 highway miles the same afternoon without complaint from either the rider or the pillion. The buying check is the same as any high-mileage BMW inline 4, confirm the valve clearance service history, since parts and labor on a neglected example add up fast. Between the 3 bikes on this list wearing a BMW badge and the 9 wearing Japanese or British ones, the pattern is clear. Nobody owns this category, which is exactly why it rewards a buyer willing to actually shop around instead of defaulting to whatever the algorithm keeps recommending. 12 bikes, 3 price points spanning discontinued bargains to current flagships, and 1 category that keeps getting ignored for no good reason. Click on the next video to continue the ride. Never buy the wrong bike again? Get your guide right now and subscribe to our channel.